Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Sturdivant, and I'm the president and CEO of the League. We are a social impact collective that leverages the reach and visibility of culture to inspire civic engagement in the new American majority, the diverse coalition that is leading America forward both politically and culturally. The League is honored to be one of the four Culture Surge anchor partners. On behalf of Culture Surge, we are so glad that you've joined us this afternoon. It probably goes without saying that we are in the midst of unprecedented times. There was a global pandemic happening. And of all of the things that I thought might be happening in 2020, I did not anticipate this one. We are standing at an important crossroad in America's history. And what we do now as a country and what we do next will define us for generations to come. As we stand at this crossroads, our democracy is in peril. Last week, the New York Times ran a piece with the following headline: Kushner, law aside, doesn't rule out delaying 2020 election. This is not The Onion. That is an actual headline in an actual newspaper from this year. The pandemic has put exponential pressure on fissures that already existed, and things are cracking wide open. This is a crisis, y'all, and we must step up to defend democracy. I'm sure that most of us on this call have used the term transformational before. As a movement, we love that term, but it has never been more appropriate than it is right now. We actually are living through a transformational moment, and that means we have an opportunity to chart a new course, to tell a new story. Doing so will require us to imagine a new way of being. And as a movement, we can come together to provide that vision for the world that we want, the world that we need. And one of the ways to do that is to use culture as a catalyst. And that is why we're launching Culture Surge. What is Culture Surge, you ask? Well, I'm going to turn it over to Marya, the executive director of Harness, another Culture Surge anchor partner, to tell you more. Marya?
Hi, Tracy.
Hey.
I've done so many of these digital events, and still it's so fun to me to be like coming out of this. I'm like, yes. My name is Marya. I'm the executive director of Harness. Harness was born out of another disruptive moment for us, which was the 2016 election. We were started by America Ferrera, Wilmer Valderrama, and Ryan Pierce Williams. Artists who wanted to understand how they could use their creativity, their platform, community, work for the good of all of us. As we've grown into a network of over 300 influence artists with dozens of community partners, one of the things we've realized is that there is a lack of like a cohesive vision for our future, especially in this moment. So many people are feeling paralyzed by fear, by scarcity, by the changing times, right? And dealing with personal loss, whether that is losing people in their families and their communities, or losing their source of income, right? Losing their way of life. And that's where culture can really come in as a way to provide a vision for how we move forward. And the best vision, a vision rooted in our highest values of abundance, of creativity, of being able to work together collectively. So in our work as Harness, what we've realized was that a lot of our movements felt like they were disconnected from each other, and that our work and culture was not coordinated. And that now more than ever, popular culture is noisy, and Americans are questioning what is truth, right? And so the power of telling our story, of a coordinated, cohesive vision, is more urgent than ever. So in 2019, last year, Harness started to explore the idea of a cultural strategy table. We had an initial brainstorm meeting at the Creative Change Retreat hosted by the Opportunity Agenda last summer, where we brought together a group of brilliant minds who sat for 2.5 days thinking about what could something like this look like. From there, we hosted workshops at the Impact Guild Forum at Sundance, as well as the several kind of other convenings that were happening with cultural strategists throughout the year. Doing a needs assessment, talking to different stakeholders, understanding what's happening in the field, doing some mapping. And in December, we convened a high-level brain trust of 35 leaders, movement leaders, artists, cultural strategists, and funders for a one-day design meeting. We brought into this meeting all the research, all the conversations that had already been done, and we asked the question, do we want to have a cultural strategy table? We understand, like, this is not the entire creative sector that we've brought together, but do we feel like this type of coordinating infrastructure is important for our sector? And the answer was a resounding yes. From the end of that meeting, 4 organizations were deputized to really lead this effort, which includes Harness, the League, as led by Tracy, and then 2 of our anchor organizations you're going to meet in just a few moments, which is Favianna Rodriguez and the Center for Cultural Power, and IllumiNatives with the incredible Crystal Echo Hawk. We are all led by women of color. We are all organizations that work across communities and across sectors. We have artists and activists that are part of it, part of the work that we do, and we believe in the power of culture to be able to change our society for the better. The other thing that I will say here is all 4 of these organizations have deeply complementary partnerships and expertise in movement building, progressive politics, cultural organizing, and artist engagement, whether that's artists on the grassroots or artists within Hollywood. And so we're coming alive in a time that we know is messy. We know it's a time of crisis. And so we're launching Culture Surge as a center of gravity, a place for people to come together to be able to coordinate, collaborate, share best information, and scale our collective impact. I'll share a little bit more about what that actually looks like, but we want to acknowledge that there are so many of you that is doing incredible work in this moment, and that this work is messy. We're in a time where it's impossible to guess what the next month is going to look like, right? But that we believe that the way that we move forward together and have this vision for our country and for the world is together, is really to come together, to bring together our best experiences, our most important kind of knowledge and information and wisdom, so that we can collectively work together. So with that, I want to thank the dozens of organizations and leaders who have helped provide input into the creation of this effort. I want to thank my fellow anchor organizations who have been meeting weekly since December. And I want to thank the Pop Culture Collaborative for seeding this effort and providing ongoing thought, partnership, and support to get Culture Surge launched. Thank you so much, and back to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Marya. As she alluded to, in many aspects of the movement, there are centers of gravity that help organize different pieces of the work. These centers of gravity are essentially pieces of infrastructure. That word infrastructure may not be sexy, but it's certainly not hyperbole, right? These centers of gravity not only provide the foundation for all of the work that's happening, but they create natural gathering points where coordinated work can happen more seamlessly because it's actually structured and supported. And one of the final frontiers we believe in our movement is creating a space where artists and activists can come together and be in relationship with one another and to engage in collaborative work, particularly around shared narratives and policy campaigns. So if we do so, we can accelerate impact where great work is already happening. And that is our intention, as Marya said, with Culture Surge. So think of it this way. Each of us, artists and activists, are holding different pieces of work. There are many seeds that have been planted right now, but to grow those seeds need healthy soil, they need to be fertilized, they need to be watered. Once they're sprouting, they need to be pollinated so that they can bloom and bear fruit. And our intention with Culture Surge is to create the rich soil, to do the fertilizing, to add the water, to create the space for the pollination, so that we can have the big, the beautiful, the vibrant garden we desperately need in this moment. And that garden will still be made up of a variety of individual flowers and plants, but collectively each plant will be stronger, it'll be healthier because of Culture Surge's efforts. And when you step back, not only will you see the beautiful individual blooms, but also the whole, the sum of our parts. What this pandemic has shown is that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. We can't afford to wait for anyone else to step up and provide the vision of what we need in this moment and what can be going forward. We are the creators of culture. Our stories and our cultural expressions shape societies and policies, and our influence our own conceptions of ourselves and the world around us. Culture is power. What we're seeing right now is that the old narratives are falling apart. This moment offers us an unprecedented opportunity to propagate new stories that will shape a more just and equitable future. It's on us to seize that opportunity and to shape this country's idea of what it means for people to not just survive, but to thrive. And I love that garden analogy I just shared because it's about abundance. And it's an abundant vision that we have the opportunity to seed right now. I think that this moment is best described by novelist Arundhati Roy. She says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their worlds anew, she writes. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our data banks, our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. We are here today because we are ready to imagine and we're ready to fight. So, on that note, I'm incredibly excited to introduce to you our keynote speaker this afternoon, Representative Ayanna Presley, who is certainly a fighter. Congresswoman Presley is a change maker on many levels. She was the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the first woman of color to be elected to the Boston City Council in its 100-year one of these has been hardest hit by COVID-19 pandemic. She has been an outspoken advocate, working to ensure that racial equity and health disparities laid bare by the pandemic are addressed in the days and the months ahead. And frankly, she is a culture maker. Representative Presley recently shared her story about her hair loss journey with the world, a topic that for many Black women, including myself, represents a personal and spiritual journey, one we've been on since birth. Her story impacted thousands of Black women across the country, creating a transformational cultural moment. We are so appreciative to have you here with us today, someone who understands the power of story, who understands the power of culture. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Presley.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear
great.
you.
You know, I'm not sure what else I can offer. I have to tell you, because I was just over here being the amen corner. Tracy, I think you already gave the keynote, but I'm going to do my best here to contribute something. Thank you to Harness, the Center for Cultural Power, the IllumiNative, and the League for inviting me to join. I'm honored to be in the company of so many fierce advocates, activists, artists, storytellers, and civic engineers. This is a powerful virtual table of people who shake the table. And I'm so excited to be a part of the launch of Culture Surge, the importance of storytelling, of grassroots organizing, of uplifting our stories. Our communities cannot be overstated, especially now. I've always said that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policymaking. And that is completely centered in the practice of storytelling. One of my favorite activists, D. Ray, reminds us that there's no such thing as being voiceless. What people are is unheard. And so I'm so excited about Culture Surge. And also just, often when I am lamenting social injustices and people will conflate it with culture and say it's just a part of the culture, as if it is just an inevitability, these injustices. But what is culture? It's simply human behavior. And it can and must be changed. It must be disrupted. And so, Tracy, I love the words that you brought into this space, because the reality is that the inequities and disparities, the racial disparities, the healthcare disparities that we see further spotlighted and exacerbated in this moment are not new. They existed long before Donald Trump descended an escalator at Trump Tower, and they existed long before COVID-19. And so when we say that we cannot wait to return to normal, I challenge all of us to reject that language, because the normal was insufficient, inadequate, and unjust to begin with. And so here we find ourselves in a pandemic, unprecedented hurt, a tsunami of hurt, a crisis within a crisis, a public health crisis, an economic crisis, and then the conflation of the two and all of the trauma that both of these crises leave in their wake. And so right now we have to be really focused on the public health crisis, saving lives. And that's why I pushed early on for the collection and disaggregation of racial data in real time to be publicly reported, to ensure that we were having an equitable public health response when it comes to testing and when it comes to treatment. We know that although the virus does not discriminate, that Black and Latinx communities have been hit the hardest, and that has everything to do with the comorbidities of structural racism. And so, being closest to environmental injustices, living in subpar housing, living in food apartheid systems. And so because Black and Latinx communities have more of these underlying conditions like asthma, like diabetes, like heart disease, as well as unequal access to healthcare. The data that has now come out as a consequence of the bill that I was able to get passed has confirmed our worst assumptions about how this would play out. And at the same time, I'm sitting here feeling incredibly grateful, but 1 in 5 Black women and Latinas can even work from home. We are dominating the essential workforces that were always essential, but that we have simply discarded as if they are disposable for far too long. So a return to normal is unacceptable. That's why we need a culture surge, a culture shift, a paradigm shift. And so I'm squarely focused on the public health response right now, as well as the economic recovery. And so for me, that does mean the canceling of rent, the canceling of mortgages. It does mean student debt cancellation. It does mean paid sick leave, paid family medical leave. It does mean Medicare for all moving forward. Some of my calloused, disconnected colleagues across the aisle said that they're tired of me and my colleagues trying to shoehorn in our Democratic wish list of priorities. Unapologetically, yes, I wish that we could center the humanity and the dignity of every individual, of every family, and of every worker. The other thing that I'm focused on, and I want to enlist all of you as accomplices in the pursuit of justice in this regard, is making sure that we are advocating for our most vulnerable. And that includes our immigrant neighbors who have been left out until recently from every relief package. Everyone should be benefiting from both the public health response and the economic recovery, regardless of race, gender, age, socioeconomic status, or immigration status. And so we have to ensure that our immigrant neighbors and families are benefiting as well from the relief. This hurt is being felt by everyone. The relief should be felt by everyone. And this also goes for our brothers and sisters that are behind the wall, either in juvenile detention facilities, in our prisons, in our jails, or in ICE detention facilities. I continue to be concerned about the growing infection rates there. These are certainly not environments that they're not meant to be hospitals. They are petri dishes for a virus like this to thrive. And these conditions were already subpar. So you can't physically distance. There isn't regular access to soap and to water. And the fact that in some instances, incarcerated men and women have been used as labor to produce alcohol hand-based sanitizer that they can't even use themselves. And so again, a return to normal is inadequate, unjust, and insufficient. We need a culture surge. We need a culture change. We need a paradigm shift. And that is where you all come in. And I'm so excited to be a part of this inaugural event. And I do just want to say specifically about creating change, as much as the crisis is reinforcing the urgency of these policies, but to achieve them will require unprecedented organizing. So imagine how we would have better weathered this storm if we already had universal health care, if we already had Medicare for all, if we already had universal child care, paid family leave, paid sick leave, if people were already working at a living wage. So this crisis reinforces the urgency for these sorts of policies, but to achieve them will require, in the midst of this unprecedented crisis, unprecedented organizing, unprecedented mobilizing, unprecedented legislating, and I will add one more, unprecedented hope. Through their denial of science and their criminal negligence, the occupant of the White House and his administration have cost tens of thousands of lives. But at the same time, as their cruel and inept response to the current crisis, they are pursuing a campaign of systemic disenfranchisement, misinformation, and voter suppression. in an attempt to silence our communities and to obstruct bold change, the change we need to prevent the inevitable repeat of this crisis. So we need everyone at the grassroots level to take a stake in our democracy, to vote, to complete your census, to organize your friends, your neighbors, and to resist efforts to roll back critical voting and civil rights protections. Because without real change, our communities will continue to be vulnerable. Artists and storytellers have such a uniquely important role to play, both in our response to this crisis and as our communities work to recover. In many ways, I get it. This crisis is overwhelming, it's unprecedented, and it's paralyzing. Just the scope of the hurt and the great disruption that it has caused. But artists and storytellers have the ability to highlight the lived experience of people in our communities, to show us how this crisis is impacting individuals and families at the most fundamental of levels, and to illustrate why meaningful, comprehensive relief is so important. And so as we approach the continued challenge of addressing the entrenched disparities in our communities, artists and storytellers have the ability to inspire and to motivate people to get engaged and to bring joy, which is so necessary as an act of resistance. So thank you all again for the honor of participating. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this inaugural launch for Culture Surge. Thank you for your sweat equity. Thank you for laboring in love. Thank you for lending your gifts to this moment. Just a little bit that I've been able to participate in has been so fortifying. And I hope you'll have me back. You know, I am the granddaughter of a Baptist preacher, so brevity is not my strong suit. And I'm very passionate about what it is that you're doing. When we realize real change, and we will, it won't be just because of the conviction of legislators in Washington. It will be because of the efforts that you are organizing and mobilizing today in your communities and communities across our country. Organizing, mobilizing, and demanding change. A culture surge, a culture shift, a paradigm shift. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Presley. That was amazing. A culture surge, a culture shift, a paradigm shift. Like we need T-shirts now. We'll
about the merchandise. Hit me up.
All about the merch. We got you. We're so honored to be in this fight with you, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. You know, as Congresswoman Presley underscored, we are in a unique moment where the threats to our health and our democracy have never been bigger. So I'm going to turn it over to Marya again to talk about exactly what Culture Surge is doing and how we're poised to respond right now.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I kind of feel like everything was said. Representative Pressley did it. But no, I thank you for setting the stage, talking about the stakes in this moment. We're in a moment of crisis and transition, but we're also in a moment of significant opportunity for transformational change. Something that a friend of mine, Valerie Kaur, said recently that I thought was really incredible is she says we have the essential workers, right? And we know how important these essential workers are, but we also have essential workers for the future, who are our storytellers, our artists, our creatives. They're people that will help push people's imagination about what the future can look like and move them from paralysis towards action. As a social change field, as a movement, we've made significant investments in the air game, in communications. We've made significant investments in the gun game, which is knocking on doors, voter engagement. But we have missing the last leg of that stool, which is the heart game to bring Americans along with us as we aim to bend the curve towards justice. We need all three of these in this moment of COVID to be able to really power our movement forward, have a vision for the future, and take action, and have that kind of paradigm shift and the policy change that Representative Pressley was talking about. And so, as Tracy mentioned, we aim to make Culture Surge the center of gravity to align all of those efforts. Culture Surge is a backbone coordinating infrastructure for the creative sector. This is something new. It hasn't existed before. Historically, when other movements such as the LGBT movement had a multiplier effect on that movement's impact in popular culture. This is a C3 vehicle that would galvanize the creative sector around a collective vision for the future, and then coordinate and amplify core, key, multiple narratives that tie back into one cohesive story platform. I'm going to say that again. We want to have one core story platform that would be the vision that we all agree that we want for the future. That is about centering our most vulnerable. It's about making sure that everyone has access and opportunity. And then there would be key narratives that come from that story platform that we would be helping to amplify. We're building on existing efforts to accelerate things rather than starting something new. What we're really envisioning is how to harness our collective energy and power to scale our overall impact and to provide a central hub for coordination, information sharing, and amplification. From the needs assessment that we've done and all of this like strategic thinking, we have identified 3 key areas of coordination: artist activation, content creation, and content distribution. When we talk about artist activation, there are networks of artists that are at the ready, that are interested in using their creativity and using their art for social good and for social justice. And so we want to provide a space for them to be able to partner with movement and electoral efforts to shape popular culture around a core set of narratives. Additionally, when it comes to content creation, content was king, but now content really is king, right? Or should I say queen, I guess? And what we want to do is we want to coordinate content creators around core narratives, foster learning about best practices and target audiences, and encourage collaboration. And then in addition, when it comes to content distribution, how many of you have created a piece of content that 100 people saw or 500 people saw, right? But that 1 million people needed to see. So we want to really create a distribution network with media partners to disseminate content and narratives to the wider public. And as you'll hear later from Yosi Sergant, he's one of the case studies we'll be featuring today. One of the things he said to me is, right now it's about quantity. What we need to do is break through the noise and to share our story again and again and again in lots of different mediums so that we can really make sure that our vision for the future is getting out there and that it's permeating the popular consciousness. Our audience, who are we speaking to? We're talking to the new American majority, communities of color, women, the poor, and those with disabilities, those on the front line, essential workers and their families. We're looking at those who are the most impacted in this moment and those who are value aligned with the vision that we have for the future. And we're not just thinking about our audience in terms of demographics, we're really thinking about them in terms of their values. Values is how we tell stories and how we win the heart game, right? And so we're really looking at audience segmentation from a value perspective and looking at how is it that we can identify key segments of the population and speak to their core values in order to help them tap into and really align with this vision for the future. This is a short-term opportunity. Right now, what we're doing is we are launching Culture Surge to coordinate around 2020, but the goal is that this infrastructure is needed for the longer term. So we want to experiment, we want to build the plane while we're flying it, get some incredible collaborations going, and evaluate at the same time, learn, and then be able to pivot this into long-term infrastructure for the field, because we believe that there's an enduring value to the social justice movement over the long term. Culture is part of what got us into this mess, right? And it's what's going to help us get out of it. So what's next? What does this look like? So we'll be rolling out a few things that we'd love for you to stay tuned for. First, we'll have a membership portal to access research, best practices, and resources. We'll have working groups for those three areas that I mentioned: artist activation, content creation, and content distribution. We're going to have creation spaces, create-a-thons, creative briefs, etc., where artists can come together with movement leaders, electoral strategists to create art. We're going to have a story platform and key narratives that we're going to be really trying to amplify and share with you all. And we're looking at a state-based strategy to coordinate geographic efforts. So if you're working specifically in a specific area of the country, let us know. And then finally, we're going to have a newsletter that's going to aggregate information and resources for the 2020 field of artists, activists, and strategists. We're rolling these things out over the next couple of months, and we do have some initial seed money, as I mentioned before, through the generous support of the Pop Culture Collaborative, but we're still fundraising. So if you're a funder, definitely reach out to us and let us know if this is something that you can help us really activate. So with that, the call to action here is to join us. There is a Join Us tab on the website. So you just click on that, you fill out the form, and we will make sure we loop you into all of these things that are coming up next. And make sure to spread the word to your network of artists, community organizations, cultural strategists, other funders. We feel like this is only as powerful as all of us collectively can make it. So we ask you to be part of this surge that we can really collectively have this vision for the future. With that, I will turn it back to Tracy. And the last thing I'll say is that we do have a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions for us, definitely put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marya. And again, use the chat function. We'd love to hear questions or comments that you have as we go throughout the conversation. So before we zoom in and talk about how the pandemic is impacting some of our partners and communities, I want to zoom out and say a few words about this political moment. So there was an impeachment that happened 4 months ago. 4 months ago feels like a lifetime. We are currently in the midst of one of the most important census counts of our lifetime, one that is going to determine resource allocations for our communities, congressional seats, and ultimately impact the Electoral College. And yes, we are in the midst of a global pandemic. Some of us are fortunate enough to be sheltering in place. Those who are essential workers have been putting their lives on the line day in and day out. And in the last 2 weeks, states have begun to reopen without any sense of clarity around what is required to preserve the well-being of everyone in the country at this moment. So that's the backdrop that we find ourselves against as we look toward November and an election that frankly is in peril, an election that may or may not happen. The recent primaries and those to come are bellwethers for us. Just look at what happened in Wisconsin. The court said no, the state health officials said yes, and an election happened, right? Not only has the state of play shifted, so has the rule book. Even the legal safeguards that we traditionally rely on aren't in place. As a movement, we are grappling to even figure out the right direction. Should everyone vote absentee? Should we implement widespread vote by mail? Should people even be able to vote in person? We are in the process of getting aligned on these issues as a movement about what the best course of action is, but these are conversations that are happening. And that is all happening against the backdrop of the eve of a massive recession. I keep saying that it's not a recession, it's a she-session. Women of color are the hardest hit, as Congresswoman Presley mentioned earlier. Women of color are the hardest hit by any economic downturn, and it's only going to grow. Our current unemployment numbers don't even take into account the people who were already on unemployment when the pandemic hit. It's just going to get worse. And these people, again, people of color and women of color in particular, who are the most impacted by the pandemic and its economic and health consequences, are also some of the most coveted voters. When it comes to this year's elections, there's a lot of work that we have to do to hold the line and to spark people's imagination about why it's critical to participate. It really is all on the line here. So I'm going to bring into this conversation some of my favorite women on the planet who are working not just to hold the line, but to create that spark of imagination. They are all three culture makers in their own right: Ayana Poo, Crystal Echohawk, and Cristina Jiménez. Cristina is the executive director and co-founder of United We Dream, the largest immigrant youth-led organization in the country. Crystal is a citizen of the Pawnee Nation and founder of an executive director of IllumiNative and another culture search anchor partner. And Ayana is the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and the co-director of Caring Across Generations. Thank you, ladies, women, for joining us in this really important conversation today. You know, each of you have been leading different aspects of this work, and we're really excited to hear from you about the on-the-ground realities in this moment. Cristina, I'm going to start with you. What are the communities who you're working with facing due to the pandemic and structural inequities, and what barriers are they facing to participate in our democracy right now?
Well, thank you so much, Tracy, and to Culture Surge and everyone that has brought us together today. It really gives me a lot of hope in the midst of such a difficult time. I represent United We Dream. I serve there as the executive director, and our members are undocumented immigrants, U.S. citizens, and folks have every immigration status, in the mix that you can imagine. And our members, as directly impacted people, are particularly being hit hard by this virus. I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens, which very quickly became the epicenter of COVID-19 deaths. But the inequity in immigrant neighborhoods in New York City was there before COVID. Elmhurst Hospital, the one and only hospital for thousands of people in the center of my own neighborhood in Jackson Heights, was under-resourced way before COVID. And now the country and the world has just seen how dangerous that public policy negligence has been. The housekeepers, parking lot attendants, cooks, dishwashers, farm workers, grocery workers, and all of those who are delivering food to sustain our lifestyle, as many of us stay home, are the people that are getting the virus and are also dying, and they are in our immigrant communities. And across the country, you've probably heard the reports of immigrants being forced to continue working shoulder to shoulder on the slaughterhouse line without any protection. And the same thing in the medical field. Many of the workers doing deep cleaning in medical facilities are doing it without the protective gear. And this was mentioned by Congresswoman Pressley. Undocumented immigrants were also punished in Congress even for paying taxes. The last stimulus made for sure that people who even paid taxes in our communities were excluded from any stimulus assistance. And among our members at United We Dream, the reports of unemployment continue to increase day by day. Luz, one of our members in the Maryland area, just shared with us this week that her mom and her dad have lost their jobs. She's the only DACA recipient and the only person that has a work permit to be able to work, and the only one with a job in this moment. So we're hearing stories of young people, many of them with DACA, who have become the only people in their households who are working and sustaining their families. And this is even as we are waiting every week on the anticipated decision on the DACA case from the Supreme Court. The last piece I will say is that we cannot forget about those in our communities who are also in detention. And as the Congresswoman was reminding us, many people are dying in detention camps across the country. So that's the amount of pain and impact in our communities. But I also look forward in this conversation to share how resilience is coming up and playing out in our communities and how all of us are taking action in this moment.
Thank you, Cristina. Crystal, what are Native communities facing in the midst of this pandemic and sort of structural inequities? And, how are they facing, what barriers are they facing to participate in democracy right now?
Yeah. Thank you, Tracy, and thank you so much to everyone who's joining us today. And IllumiNative is just honored to be a part of Culture Surge and one of the anchor organizations. So, just to give you a quick snapshot on what's happening in Native communities, there's over 7,400 cases all across Indian country. And actually that number is probably significantly higher because invisibility was an issue. Invisibility of Native peoples was an issue pre-pandemic. Well, we're seeing that really play out now. And the fact that, 70% of our population actually lives in cities, but the majority of cities in the United States are not even capturing that data. So they're not even counting Native peoples. We're kind of classified as others. So we don't even really have a real sense on those numbers. But what we are seeing is that cases are increasing. And in fact, and unfortunately, Navajo Nation has over 4,300 cases, and they have now surpassed New York as the highest, coronavirus infection rate per capita in our country. It's been absolutely devastating to see, but we're also starting to see other hotspots sort of breaking out in Phoenix and Albuquerque Indian Health Service areas. We're seeing, skyrocketing rates now starting to happen in the New Mexico pueblos, such as San Felipe and Zia, also at Mississippi Band of Choctaw and the Ho-Chunk. And in Wyoming, for example, Native peoples make up 30% of the cases in the state of Wyoming right now. The other trend that we're seeing is that, the death rates are really high for Native peoples. In Arizona, Native peoples make up 22% of that death rate related to COVID-19, more than 38% in New Mexico, and here in Oklahoma, where I live, we make up more than 11% of the death rate here in the state. So we're really seeing with those numbers, the story playing out that COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting Native peoples as well. And I think, oftentimes as we've really gotten into this conversation about disproportionate impacts, we need to make sure that we're talking about everyone, and Native peoples are certainly being, disproportionately impacted. And, we can't say it enough. It's not because of our biology. It's because of health disparities that are a result of just systemic discrimination and inequalities and chronic funding. And I think that just the real failure and negligence of the federal government to honor its obligations and its treaties and its promises to Native peoples in this country. And, as I said, invisibility has really played itself out in ways that really become a matter of life and death. And the Trump administration has consistently delayed funding that was approved by Congress, emergency relief funding, like right off the bat, to the stimulus dollars, to Native communities. And that is really a matter of life or death, where our people have really struggled with shortages of hospital beds, PPE, testing, you name it. And it's not acceptable what the federal government's response has been, and its complete disregard for Native communities. But I would say the final sort of headline, as I think about how this has impacted our communities, is also we have so many stories of our resilience and our strength and our leadership, and the way that tribes and Native nonprofits have stepped up and come together. And we're not waiting for the federal government. We've really rallied to try to figure out how we get needed medical supplies and food and water to our people, and to really, look at how we're protecting our elders and taking care of our communities.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Those numbers, are staggering. As I was reading earlier this week, that the numbers in the Native community sort of transcend the numbers for Black and Brown communities collectively. And I'm so appreciative of the work that you all are doing to shine a spotlight on that. Ijen, talk to us a little bit about how your members and the communities and the National Domestic Worker Alliance Network are sort of, structural inequities, and what barriers are they facing to participate in our democracy right now?
Thanks, Tracy. And I just want to say how inspiring it is to be among so many brilliant women having this conversation right now, despite the crisis. I know, just hearing from everyone, that we are going to not only survive, but move through this into a better future. I would say that from domestic workers, echoing a lot of what's already been said in terms of the impact. Domestic workers are part of a low-wage workforce that before the COVID crisis worked without benefits, without paid time off, without sick days, without health care, and earned poverty wages. So you had people who were working incredibly hard and still struggled to make ends meet. So there was no money to stock up on groceries or supplies, no safety net whatsoever. And as the COVID crisis started to unfold, even before the stay-at-home orders and the travel bans, we were hearing reports from house cleaners who had their clients cancel jobs at the last minute, nannies who were losing their jobs and unsure if they would get them back ever again. So dramatic losses in income. So very quickly we started hearing that domestic workers were going to have a hard time paying for food to feed their children who were home from school, keeping the utilities on and paying urgently needed basic bills, actually paying for phone bills that their kids were using in order to get access to remote learning, because the internet they access through their mobile phones. And so we knew there was going to be a huge financial crisis, and it just unfolded and continues to unfold. And we also have a population of workers who continue to work as part of the essential workforce, providing life-saving services to some of the most vulnerable populations in the crisis, providing home care for our growing older population in this country who are living at home still and rely upon home care workers for food, for medication, for basic activities of daily living and safety. These workers are all they have. And it's also including people with chronic illnesses. And we need to keep those people safe in their homes so they don't overwhelm already overwhelmed hospital systems. So just the incredible essential nature of this work that they're doing. And yet they don't have protective equipment. and they don't have access to testing or treatment. And so it's been a real struggle full of impossible choices for domestic workers and caregivers who are struggling to really care for themselves and their families and the people that they support through this crisis. And I would say the beautiful thing about it is, if you can find beauty amidst all this devastation, is that I think the country for the first time is awakening to just how many forms of low-wage work that we have taken for granted and have been largely invisible to us, just how essential they are, and how important it is that we not only recognize essential workers, but we protect them. We keep them safe because they're keeping us safe. And I really believe that this conversation around work and the dignity and the need to keep all workers safe and to create a safety net that actually keeps us all safe, immigrant, non-immigrant, no matter what kind of work we do, where we do that work, we all deserve a strong safety net in this country. And I do see that window opening and more of us pushing it wider and wider so that we can not only just recognize people, but really protect them for the 21st century. So I definitely feel a sense of resilience and also potential to achieve long-standing goals that we've had to recognize and protect workers.
The time is now. You're so right, Ayana. I mean, one of the reasons why we were so excited about having the three of you in conversation this afternoon is you each intentionally use culture as a part of the way in which you do your work. And so, with the backdrop of the elections happening and sort of the threats and opportunities, right, that, Ayana just talked about, what are the narrative shifts? Ayana just sort of alluded to some of them, but what are the narrative shifts that you all are looking to make as it relates to this moment and how it can potentially impact your communities? Cristina?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Ayana really tee us up here for how we can think about the present and the future. And, my deep hope and the hope of the members at United We Dream is that we can emerge out of this pandemic with a renewed appreciation of the role that every person has in our society. Whether you fit the category of essential worker or not, whether you're an immigrant or not, despite the background, race, gender, religion, and immigration status. And we have a huge opportunity, as the Congresswoman was saying, not only to organize our communities, but also to transform the conversation about who matters, whose life is valuable, and the fact that all of us and our well-being is completely interconnected. And I think that this virus has exposed that interconnection a lot more. For example, at United We Dream, some of the things that we've been doing are, despite the fact that the federal government excluded intentionally undocumented families and decided to not support them with cash assistance, even though we know that the job loss is huge, we decided to put together a national fund, our national undocufund.com, that aimed at supporting, in the first phase, 600 families with $400 each, so that people can pay for food, the utility bills, etc. Because we understood that if the government was going to leave people without adequate support, we as communities could come together to address that and take action. And in less than 48 hours, we were able to raise $120,000 to support those families. And just yesterday, we had an amazing town hall digital conversation with Senator Warren, Secretary Julian Castro, and members of the cast and the creator of the Netflix show One Day at a Time, to have a conversation about how COVID is impacting immigrant communities. And we were able to raise, in the span of an hour conversation, over $20,000. So that is just one way in which communities, are coming together, and how we could use this opportunity not only to organize, but to make the connections between activists and organizers, and also culture creators, artists, actors, actresses. The last piece I will share is that storytelling is very important right now. To the point that Crystal was reminding us about invisibility. the pain and the impact of our communities has remained quite invisible in the political conversation. In fact, the inequities that were there before COVID have been invisible. And I've had so many conversations with reporters who are shocked about the conditions in which immigrants were living in before COVID and what they're dealing with now during COVID. And I'm thinking to myself, I thought people knew that undocumented folks don't have access to healthcare and that they do pay taxes. And so these are some of the things where we have opportunities to tell stories, not only of the impact, but also of the resilience. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there.
It sure is. Crystal, how are you all faring? You've been using culture in your organizing strategies, and with the election in the backdrop, how are you all thinking about this moment?
I mean, I think for us, it's really that invisibility becomes a matter of life or death during a pandemic. And so that visibility, that storytelling has been so absolutely critical. And I think in part of that storytelling is it's about all lives matter, including Native lives. And this pandemic has laid bare, when it was like mid-March that the government announced that it had little more than 1,300 beds nationwide for Native Americans within the Indian healthcare system and less than 10 ventilators in the system. I mean, this gross negligence, right? This chronic underfunding that has gone on for such a long time to really hold truth to power. And just, this is not the country we all want to live in, that we don't value all lives, that we don't value Native Americans or essential workers, immigrants, all of us, every life matters. And so I think that is just really what we've been pushing. And it is about visibility, right? And it is about that Native peoples are an important part of the fabric of this country. And right now it's largely a disparity narrative, even as more coverage has increased, that it really only wants to talk about the disparities and that, at Navajo, people lack running water and all these things that are really actually happening. But there's actually a huge story here that Native peoples and tribes are part of the solution, right? And that tribes have really, they are major economic engines within their counties that they reside in their states. There's been 1 million jobs lost that's tied to Indian gaming and Indian country, right? And 90% of those workers are non-Native. So anybody that doesn't think that tribes and Native peoples aren't part of the solution as we start talking about reopening, economic recovery, and other things, they've got another thing coming where, and we have a lot of really, amazing people. So I think it is really shifting that narrative that, one, that we are here, but two, we're an essential part of American society, and we're going to be an essential part of the solutions and an essential part of the solutions and this new norm, right, that the Congresswoman talked about, right, that we want to build and create. We are all related. That is a core value that so many Native communities have, is that we are all related. And COVID-19 has taught us that more than ever. And so it's a call to action as I think about our progressive movement. And as we think about the opportunity around the election, do not forget that Native peoples are here and we are ready for change as well. And we stand shoulder to shoulder, and our vote is going to count, especially in those 7 battleground states. And we stand ready to organize with all of you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Ijan, you all have been one of the leading organizations sort of utilizing culture as a strategy and organizing strategy. Talk about what narratives you see the opportunity to plant and shift in the backdrop of this election.
Well, I think a lot of us have children at home, and we have parents who need our support right now. And so we're all caregivers in this moment. And I think it's a huge opportunity to really uplift care as a collective responsibility. And so we have a campaign, the National Domestic Workers Alliance and Caring Across Generations. We have a campaign right now called Care for All. And we're in the middle of doing what we call the Rosie Challenge, where we're asking everybody to do their best Rosie pose, take a selfie and post it on social and tag 5 of your friends. And they can include members of Congress as well. And the call is really about sharing uplifting caregivers, whether you're caring for a family member or you're caring for, you're a professional caregiver, that we are all connected through our care, and that we also have the ability in this moment to take collective responsibility and care for all of us. So I hope you'll join us in that, and really excited to continue to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you all, Cristina, Crystal, Ayan, so much for joining us. And for those who are excited and interested in some of the campaigns that the three of them shared, you should reach out to them. The Culture Surge is going to be working to make sure that you all have access to know what amazing work that's happening that is sort of centered around narrative and cultural organizing. So this won't be the last time that you hear from the three of them and the work that they're doing. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We're going to shift and, have had the opportunity to hear from folks who are knee deep in the work around the pandemic and the work that they're doing to defend democracy. Now we want to spend some time discussing how other projects and organizations are stepping up in this moment to really move narratives to address inequities and to protect democracy. I'm excited to bring in my sister Favianna Rodriguez, Allie Young, and Yosi Sergant into the conversation. Favianna is the co-founder and president of the Center for Cultural Power, a national organization investing in artists and storytellers as agents of positive social change. And the center is another Culture Surge anchor partner. Allie Young is a citizen of the Navajo Nation from the Northern Agency of the Reservation in Northern New Mexico. She works with Harness as well as Protect the Sacred and is a storyteller and writer on a mission to increase authentic representation in Native American and TV, film, and mainstream media. And then Yosi Sergant is the founder and lead cultural strategist at Task Force, an independent agency building momentum for people and organizations tackling our world's toughest challenges. Favianna, tell us about what the Center for Cultural Power's new artist guide and how it builds on some of the opportunities we've heard from the previous speakers.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy, and thank you to the speakers. And I want to just start with also naming the hardship that artists are facing at this moment, from the very beginning, starting with the cancellation of major festivals. We as artists are spaces of gathering, whether it's comedy clubs or places where we play music or places where we show our films or watch theater, they are all closed. And already artists are like a freelance set of workers. So we find that 2/3 of artists currently are unemployed. And these are the same folks who are entertaining us now at the time of the pandemic, because we would not be able to get by if it wasn't for the wonderful DJing and the comedy and the book clubs and all the things that artists are offering. Artists really are here both to comfort us, but also to show us what's possible and to help us tap our imagination. And so if somebody could go ahead and put my slides up, the project that we just finished and will be launching soon is called No Going Back. And this guide was created. This is a guide for artists, a cultural strategy guide that was created in collaboration with a number of wonderful organizers and cultural strategists like Liz Mann, Aaron Potts. We were in conversation with the New Economy Coalition, Native Organizers Alliance, NOLA Worker Center for Racial Justice, to aggregate the demands of the movement, looking at what, for example, the folks are doing at People's Bailout, and how we can aggregate these movement demands and turn it into a toolbox box so that artists know how to create, right? Because not only do we have so many artists right now who are eager to create and who are impacted and frankly upset and angry at the sheer inequality that is being revealed by the pandemic, but also we can help funnel this energy towards the progressive causes that we want. Because as we heard so many people say, artists not only expose the problem in such a powerful way, but they also speak to our emotions, and they can help us imagine and visualize and see and feel and experience the world we want. But that doesn't just happen. It requires organization, it requires training, it requires for us to be in close communication with movement groups. Next, and often when we think about social change, I like to think that the social change happened in 3 realms: in the cultural realm, the political realm, and the economic realm. We are witnessing now how the failures of how the political system is not serving those who are most vulnerable. And we are in the midst of an entire economic reset, right? Of a wealth transfer of the size that we have not seen before. And as you have heard, programs like PPP, the economic stimulus is very much not reaching impacted communities. And so we, in the space of culture, have the opportunity to shape both of those spaces. But we need to be telling our stories, and we need to be telling our stories in a way that helps us win and helps us name and articulate the vision. And, Naomi Klein says this so well, is that in the time of fracture and chaos, we have to come with a vision, and that begins with culture. Next, the guide is, I'll talk about this, but from the beginning, from March, we saw just how fast artists could activate, whether it was messages around closing prisons, or talking about universal basic income or valuing essential workers. Not only is culture speak to our emotions and our hearts, culture moves fast. It moves very, very fast. And so how can we, as a cultural sector, both support the needs of artists, but also give them the tools so that they can move in a way that's helpful to our movements? Next. And finally, this is a glimpse at something you will find in the guide, but what are the narratives we need, right? A sustainable, joyful world. Something that emphasizes that we actually do have the solutions and that we can get through this together. Many of these narratives in the guide, they're explored. We provide examples. We provide possible political outcomes that can emerge when we talk about sustainable solutions. And we very much put thought into how this translates into issues. So, for example, with climate justice, we now know that governments and nations can move when there is a threat to humanity. Around gender equity, we know that COVID is a gendered crisis and that we have to absolutely include a gender just frame. And so this guide helps break down narratives with tangible advice and also elevates the movement demands so that artists are well informed. And then finally, the guide closes with resources for artists so that artists can build community during this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Favianna. I'm going to hand it over to Allie to talk to us a little bit about the work that they are doing with Protect the Sacred campaign and how artists are helping protect Native communities during this pandemic. Allie?
Oh, apologies. Sorry, I was muted. Yate Ali yang insha totoni nishla toana bashishina kaidina adashche net odina etachitni dashinelle. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Allie Young. And I want to start off with a video that we launched a couple of weeks ago that's part of our Navajo Strong campaign.
Dear America.
Dear America.
Dear America.
150 years ago, we made a promise.
That the beautiful citizens of the Navajo Nation would be cared for the same way all Americans are.
To give the first people of this land the respect and dignity we have owed them for a long time.
Now is the time to make good on our promises.
Navajo Nation, my nation, is a third hotspot in the United States.
There are just over 175,000 people living on the reservation, 30% without running water.
We're in need of test kits, medicines, personal protective equipment, including masks, gowns, and face shields.
And now, medical staff.
The danger is this. Our elders are at the greatest risk, the keepers of our stories, language, and culture.
We have to protect our elders.
We are resilient. We are survivors.
We can beat this.
please go to
protectthesacred.net
and donate if you can.
We ask all allies of the Navajo people to help us. Do you hear us?
We hear you.
We hear you.
We see you.
We see you.
We see you.
We see your resilience.
We believe in you.
We believe in you.
We love you.
We love you.
We love you.
The force is strong with the Navajo.
Navajo strong.
Navajo strong. Navajo strong.
Navajo strong. Navajo strong.
Navajo strong.
Nebetzi.
Navajo strong.
Navajo strong, the Nebetzil.
The force is strong with the Navajo.
Thank you, Kevin. That was our video to promote our website, which is where you can donate, find places to donate. We partnered with the Office of the Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez, and also you can find information on how to sign up to be a medical volunteer and come out to the Navajo Nation. So Protect the Sacred is a grassroots initiative that I started when I arrived home, and it's supported by Harness and also working in partnership with Mark Ruffalo and Julia Walsh of We Stand United and Wahala Johns of Native Renewables. I'm so fortunate to be in the Harness community and have Harness as the place where I work, and how they're supporting me so much. And I'm forever grateful for the support around this vital work. So I've lived in Los Angeles for the last 5 years, working in entertainment and the nonprofit organizations, but returned home to help when COVID-19 exploded on my reservation. When I arrived, my former colleagues at the Shiprock Indian Health Service asked me to help communicate with young people about the risks of COVID-19 and the importance of staying home. This led to my organizing Protect the Sacred, which means protecting our elders. They're the keepers and carriers of our stories, language, medicine ways, and culture. It's vital to our tribal communities to protect what culture remains after centuries of colonization and forced assimilation. Protect the Sacred continues to respond to the devastating impact of COVID-19 on the Navajo Nation, which recently surpassed New York for the highest coronavirus infection rate in the US by engaging Navajo youth. Most recently, we launched our Navajo Strong campaign with that PSA that you just saw, with all of these allies who lend their voices and also their platforms to amplifying the issues we're facing, the plight of the Navajo Nation. To call for donations, medical supplies, and medical volunteers to come to the Navajo Nation. A couple of weeks ago, Jimmy Fallon also helped us spread the word on his show, naming Protect the Sacred as a place to find ways to donate and help the current crisis in the Navajo Nation. We're also partnering with Sean Penn and his company CORE to build sustainable isolation units, and Chef Jose Andres of World Central Kitchen to feed medical professionals and patients. This support is incredible and vital right now. As I mentioned, over the last several days, the Navajo Nation officially becoming the #1 hotspot in the US. As of last night, we have 4,153 positive cases and 144 deaths in a nation with a population of around 125,000 people. We have 2,304.41 cases per 100,000 people compared to New York's 1,806 person rate. This is not okay for a Native community, as the Native population now only makes up around 2% of the total population. It's scary and frustrating, and the US government has an obligation to our tribal communities. This lag in lending support violates our treaties that we signed. In Navajo, that's the Treaty of 1868. Our people were forced on what we call the Long Walk to march hundreds of miles from Fort Defiance, Arizona to Fort Sumner, New Mexico. And a lot of our people died along the way. And right now, our youth are, through Protect the Sacred, it was our call out to the youth to step up in this moment to be leaders, by becoming the communicators and messengers, taking the information that we're communicating to them so that they can then relay it to their elders and older generations on the Navajo Nation about the severity of the virus. And with that and their creativity, we've been able to communicate, the needs, and also in collaboration with a lot of our allies and influencers. So I have this slide here that shows some of the people we've partnered with. Right in the middle there is our Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez and Mark Ruffalo. And Mark has been an integral part of this since the beginning and helping us make these connections. And as part of this work, it's so important to be in control of our narratives, and that's by connecting these allies who want to help, to tribal leadership, to community leadership, and so far it's worked in our favor and has been tremendous. The support has been tremendous. Mark has been able to connect us to folks like Paul Rudd and Taika Waititi, who were part of our second Facebook live stream to jumpstart our Navajo Hero and Shiro Challenge, to engage Navajo youth in taking on leadership roles during this time. And also, Mark had connected us to Sean Penn and Chef Jose Andres, who we then connected to the Navajo Nation president. And now Sean and Chef have just last week were here on Navajo. Sean Penn's company Core is bringing in 30,000 test kits to the Navajo Nation. Chef Jose and his team have set up a site here in Fort Defiance where they're feeding a lot of our Navajo families. And it's just incredible. And I think that when these influencers are hearing stories from the community and how it's impacting us, in my own family, my cousin passed last week. His name is Brigham Young. I have I think on Navajo Nation, we have our community, I think at this point knows someone who's passed. And in this moment, it's all we're trying to do is help with as much as we can in bringing in donations, and also providing support to our community with positive, uplifting messages. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allie, for sharing the great work that you are doing, and it's just so necessary. And we're just really appreciative that that you're taking leadership in this really important moment. I'm going to bring Yosi to the conversation. Tell us about Into Action Lab. What is it, and how is it helping to drive narratives around COVID-19 health inequities and efforts to protect democracy?
Yes. First and foremost, let me just say what an honor it is to be among such great company. Every single person who spoke today is somebody who I greatly admire. These are some of the best creators and leaders that I know, and to be included in this conversation is just such an honor. I also want to reinforce what Favi said. 2/3 of artists are currently unemployed and hurting. And it's important that we as a collective support each other and honor that pain and honor that loss, name it, as we go into this work. And knowing that even with all that pain and all that honor, artists are showing up with such force and such creativity and such leadership is, I think none of us would expect anything else. I also want to thank the whole community of people who it's going to take for us to build the kind of narrative work that we're looking to engage. Not only this cycle, but ongoing, the producers, the funders, the creatives themselves, the strategists, this entire network of people. You're all doing such good work, and it's such an honor to be a part of it. You know, I think it is one of the base ideas of that we work with is that this is work that has been done for generations, and that we stand on the shoulders of great leaders who've come before us and great creatives who will come after us, and that we're just trying to bring our best version of ourselves and lean on the learnings that have come from this work to create an appropriate structure for this particular moment. The moment that we're in today does not look like the moment that we were in 4 years ago or 8 years ago, and specifically even 6 months ago, if we're all honest about it. This is a little bit of a new world that we're walking into. And structures for spreading and scaling culture and narrative are going to evolve, and they're going to evolve rapidly. And we need the kind of tools and resources to come to the table that lean on the tradition of this work, and to, as well, to invest in the new infrastructures we're going to need in order to succeed moving forward. So let's jump right in to the slides, if possible. So not very many people know this, but Giphy is the second largest search engine in the world after Google. Who would have thunk? We have built a machine generating pro-social content and cultural content specifically for good. This is the social language that is driving narratives amongst young people today. And leading up to COVID, there was a great imbalance in what we call the passive and active narrative of the internet, the repositories that fuel social engagement moving forward. If we're going to build and protect democracy in its truest form, it means we need to invite as many people into the conversation as possible, where they are, and meet them where they are, that is. If politics is where some of the people are some of the time, culture is where all of us are all of the time. If we're only engaging in political discourse, we're ignoring the vast majority of people who only engage in political discourse in a fraction of their day, in a fraction of their lives. And the reality is, as we know, most of those people are with great intention excluded from those conversations. So we need to invite them in through the cultural landscape into these important and meaningful conversations, honor their voices, lift their voices, and give them the tools and resources they need. Next slide. So what we've built is called the Into Action Creative Lab. And at the end of the day, you can go to the next slide. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is giving people the tools and resources they need to advocate on their own behalf. There are a ton of people who share your beliefs, who share your value systems, who stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Do they have the ephemera that they need in order to advocate on their own behalf, in order to lift their own voices, in order to engage their own communities? We believe that there's been a gap in the production of that content at volume. 8 years ago, or gosh, it was longer than that now. It was a lot longer than that now. We created a Hope poster. That poster, that singular poster, met that moment. We're not in that moment anymore. The Into Action Lab is set to produce 10,000 pieces of content between now and the election cycle. The scale at which volume is, the scale at which cultural content is consumed today is rapidly increasing, especially with so many of us sitting in front of our computers so long. Let's go to the next slide. So what does that look like in today's digital landscape in the COVID reality, right? It looks like meaningful, beautiful, dynamic cultural content generated by our community and driving the kind of meaningful engagements, the tools and resources that people need to fill their social media streams and to project to their community, to their loved ones, to their friends, and to their family members what they believe, and to bring people along into the democratic process and into the electoral process specifically. Next slide, please. And it doesn't all look beautiful and full of dynamic illustrations. The internet is often a weird and static and poorly designed place as well. And so the lab is generating a ton of content designed to penetrate into those dark recesses of the internet, those libraries that are fueling passive and active narratives around our work. Let me take some of that in. And this content is intersectional. We're not looking necessarily at exclusively COVID content. We're looking at where COVID touches a whole wide range of subject matter, all the things that our family members are sitting at home, our community members are sitting at home, and that are on their minds. You know, we need to be looking at where all of these subject matters intersect and how they play into an environment that is helping people make their decisions on if they're going to participate in democracy, if they're going to vote, how they're going to vote, and when they're going to vote. Next slide. As we move closer to the election, we'll work towards GOTV efforts. Again, this is a part of a campaign and learning that we've done over the last few years. We run a project fueled by work that was started by culture members who are on this call, Favianna, Aaron Potts, Liz Mann, etc., through the culture group. When we launched Go Vote, in the last election cycle, we had over 350 million shares of content from Go Vote cycle, and this work will lead into and drive towards the Go Vote process as well. Next slide. So here are some facts about what we're doing. All content is unbranded and free. It's available to everyone so that not one organization can stake claim to the beautiful content, but it's available to everyone, fueling each vertical and fueling social media broadly. Over the last 2 months, we've already produced 1,500 pieces. Our goal is to get to 10,000 by the election. In just the last 2 months, our content has been viewed 2.6 billion times on platform. That's on platform. Somebody has seen it, so we get to count it. Once it gets shared beyond the platform, we don't know. So that number may be much higher, but we know that on platform, it's 2.6 billion. The content has been shared measurably 22 million times. We have 25 organizational partners who are helping us shape what content is needed and what content gets made along the cultural calendar, especially the electoral calendar. And there are over 50 animators who are contributing into this work. This is an opportunity. We see this as an opportunity to fuel and fund the creative energy around this electoral process and on our efforts to save democracy in this moment. A majority of whom are women of color of our animators. In fact, over 80% are. And this is just the beginning. We're about to head into art interventions and a physical ephemeral stage of this action. So really quickly, just to backtrack it, this is the end of the slides. Let's go to the last slide really quick so you guys can see where you can tap into this work. The landscape of what cultural content looks like has shifted. Oftentimes people are absorbing long form content, but how they're engaging in their social platforms is often in these bites, in this small, quick, rapid response content. Our content is quick to share, quick to access. You can access it on any one of the social platforms. If you look at the animated GIF button on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, on the Facebooks, all of them, and if you search for any one of the major issues that we've just pushed up, this content will arrive. It's also available in this top link here in the bit.ly link for you as organizers and you as creatives to look into the back end, to look at all of the content that's available in one place so you can put together your own calendar and start to plan out this content over the next 6 months. I really, again, just want to thank Harness and the 4 organizations for having me here and doing this great work. It's so necessary, and I look forward to being in collaboration and partnership moving forward.
Thank you, Yosi, for sharing the amazing work that you're doing. I see a lot of folks in the comments going like, what? Like, who knew this was out here? So excited that we could introduce this to some of you. And with that, we're going to move into our Q&A session. Again, I want to thank Favi Allie and Yosi for sharing. And we're excited about being able to lift up more of the types of projects and the critical work that's happening in this moment as Culture Surge moves forward. I'm now being joined on screen by my fellow Culture Surge anchor partners, Marya, Crystal Echohawk, Favianna Rodriguez. We're happy to take any questions that you all may have about Culture Surge. And if you haven't already, please add your questions to the chat box on your screen.
We don't have any questions as of yet, so I want to just make sure we repeat for everybody that you should go to the website culturesurge.com and click on the Join Us button and fill out the form so we can keep you updated and loop you into the work that's happening. And just thank you to all of the speakers. This has been so incredible, and it just demonstrates the power of culture, you know, to bring us all together and to show our muscle as Fabi does.
Yeah, and the power of women of color leadership.
Well, then there's that part. We do have a love fest quite often about that.
I see there is a question here about how will you address the privacy issues that arise regarding Giphy, which was just bought by Facebook. That's a question for Yosi. I wonder if we can bring him back on. I don't know if we can with the tech.
Yeah. So absolutely, this happened. For those of you who don't know, Giphy was purchased a week and a half ago by Facebook. Implementation of that partnership will take a while. We've been talking with an amazing group of folks inside of Giphy and inside of Facebook who are helping to answer our questions about this merger. The reality is they don't really know what it's going to look like yet internally. And it's going to take a lot of time for that work to happen. Ultimately, what it will do for the world of animated GIFs in general is it will only increase and elevate the role that those animated GIFs are playing. There's a reason that Facebook bought this platform. That's right. Right? They bought it because it is one of the most viral and one of the most effective forms of communication. The challenge that we're having is that it is relatively new in the picture of content. And so that the mechanisms of tracking and tracing such a disparate campaign, it's one thing if you're trying to track a single piece of content and watch where it goes. But when you're trying to track 10,000 pieces of content and watch where they go, it becomes really difficult. And so a partnership with a platform as big as Facebook will only hopefully lift our ability to track the content that we're working with and lift the visibility for the content on platform.
Great. Thank you, Yosi. There's some other questions here for you, but what I think, just so that we can end on time, we will definitely send a recap email with kind of links to your work and to all of the case studies that were mentioned today, Favianna, Allie from Protect the Sacred, as well as the speakers that we had, Jen, Cristina Jiménez, and Crystal, obviously, from IllumiNative right here. And we'll also send out the recording. Tracy, if you want to close this out.
Yes, no, we one more time want to say thank you to all of our partners who joined us on screen today, Representative Ayanna Presley, Ijin Hu, Cristina Jiménez, Allie Young, and Yosi Sargent, of course, Favianna. And we want to thank you all for tuning in with us today. As Marya said, this is just the first of many opportunities we envision for bringing everyone together. And we hope to see you next time. Be well and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.